There is a way to walk into Costco, spend the same money you were already planning to spend on steak, and walk out with more usable beef than you would get from the trays sitting right in front of you. Most shoppers never see it. And the funny part is, Costco is not hiding some special discount from you. The cheaper option is often sitting in the same meat department, just packaged differently. I learned this lesson the hard way years ago when I stopped looking at the price on the package and started looking at what I was actually paying for. Because when you buy individual steaks, you are not only paying for the beef, you are paying for someone to trim it, portion it, arrange it, wrap it, label it, refrigerate it, and sell it before the meat loses its shelf life. When you buy a larger cut and do that work yourself, some of that money stays in your pocket. But there is an important catch. Buying the biggest piece of beef you can find does not automatically save you money. If you pick the wrong cut, trim it badly, cut it too thin, or throw the usable scraps into the trash, you can lose the advantage before you ever cook the first steak. That is why the method matters. And once you understand what the butcher is looking at when he sees a whole piece of beef, the meat case starts looking completely different. The first thing I want you to stop doing is comparing packages by sticker price alone. A $20 package of steaks might look cheaper than a $60 whole cut, but ask a different question. How many pounds of actual steaks are you getting after trimming? That number tells you much more. A whole strip loin, ribeye section, or another large steak cut can contain fat, connective tissue, uneven ends, and trimming that you may not want sitting on your plate. That does not mean those parts are worthless. It means you need to know what you are buying. This is the part most people miss. A butcher does not look at a large piece of beef and see one expensive piece of meat. He sees several different uses. The center can become thick steaks. The thinner end can become smaller steaks or stir fry. The lean trimming can become ground beef. The clean fat can become cooking fat. Suddenly the calculation changes. You are not buying one thing. You are buying several meals from the same piece of beef. I spent enough time around meat counters to learn one rule that has never failed me. Buy the cut before somebody else has done all the cutting for you. That does not mean every whole cut is a bargain. It means that when you have the knowledge to break it down yourself, you have more control over what you pay for and what you get. Now let me show you how I would approach this at Costco. Start with the package. Look at the weight first. Then look at the price per pound. Do not let the large total price scare you. If a whole piece weighs 8 pounds and costs $80, that is $10 per pound. If the smaller steaks beside it cost $15 per pound, the whole cut is obviously worth investigating. But that is only the beginning. You need to inspect the meat itself. Look for good marbling. You want those small flecks and lines of fat spread through the muscle rather than one giant pocket of fat sitting in one place. You also want a reasonably even shape. A very uneven piece can still be good beef, but you will spend more time trimming it and you may end up with smaller steaks from one end. This is where buying cheap can become expensive. I would rather pay a little more per pound for a piece that gives me consistently useful steaks than save $1 per pound on something that leaves me with a mountain of waste. There is another thing I look at, the fat. You do not want to remove every bit of it. That is a mistake I see all the time. People buy a beautiful steak and attack it with a knife until there is almost no fat left. Then they wonder why the steak tastes dry. You want to remove the parts that are thick, hard, or unpleasant, but leave a reasonable amount of useful fat around the steak. That fat can help with browning and flavor during cooking. The goal is not to make the meat look perfectly clean before it hits the pan. The goal is to turn the whole piece into useful portions. Now comes the part where your knife matters. You do not need 10 different butcher knives. You need one good sharp knife that you can control. An 8-inch or longer chef's knife or slicing knife is plenty for most home jobs. And sharp matters more than expensive. A dull knife forces you to push. A sharp knife lets you make long, controlled cuts. Before cutting, I like the beef cold, very cold. Not frozen solid, but firm enough that it holds its shape. If the meat is soft and floppy, your knife will wander. That is how you end up with steaks that are thick on one side and thin on the other. Put the sealed package in the refrigerator until it is thoroughly chilled. If you need it firmer for easier cutting, a short period in the freezer can help. The exact time depends on the size of the piece and how cold your freezer runs, so do not blindly follow a timer if the meat is already firm. You are looking for control. Once the beef is firm, put it on a large, clean cutting board. And now slow down. Do not start slicing immediately. Look at the grain. The grain is the direction the muscle fibers are running. That direction matters because when you eventually eat the steak, you want to cut across those fibers rather than along them. A steak cut against the grain is easier to chew. A steak cut with the grain can feel tougher even when the meat itself is perfectly good. This is one of those small details that cost you nothing and can make a noticeable difference. Now decide how thick you want your steaks. At home, you have something the supermarket usually cannot give you: control. If you want a thick steak, cut it thick. Around 1 1/4 to 1.5 inches is a very useful range for many steaks because it gives you enough thickness to build a good crust while still controlling the inside temperature. Want something thinner for sandwiches? Cut it thinner. Want smaller portions? Cut them smaller. That flexibility is part of the value. You are not forced to accept whatever thickness the store decided would fit neatly inside a foam tray. And that brings us to one of the biggest advantages of buying larger cuts. You can portion the beef around your household instead of buying a package designed for everybody else. If there are 2 people eating dinner, you do not need 6 steaks sitting in your refrigerator. Cut what you need. Package the rest immediately. For steaks you will not cook soon, wrap them tightly and remove as much air as practical before freezing. If you have a vacuum sealer, this is where it earns its place in the kitchen. If you do not, you can still package the meat carefully using freezer-safe wrapping. Label every package, write the cut and date on it. That sounds boring. Do it anyway. 6 weeks from now, you will thank yourself. The freezer is full of mystery packages because somebody thought they would remember what was inside. You will not. Now let's talk about the trimming. This is where people either save money or throw it away. When you finish portioning a whole cut, you will have pieces that are too small or oddly shaped to become traditional steaks. Do not automatically throw them out. Look at them. If the trimming is clean, lean meat, separate it, cube it, bag it, freeze it. Use it later for stir-fry, steak sandwiches, chili, kebabs, or ground beef. That is still beef. It did not become garbage because it failed to look like a perfect restaurant steak. One of the oldest butcher habits is using the whole piece. The customer may only see the steak. The butcher sees everything around it. That difference is where a lot of the savings come from. But there is one part you need to be careful with. Do not mix every scrap together. Hard connective tissue is not the same as clean, lean meat. Large chunks of tough membrane do not magically become tender because you ground them. Separate useful lean trimming from pieces that are mostly gristle or connective tissue. The same goes for fat. Clean beef fat has uses. You can render it slowly and use the resulting tallow for cooking, but do not assume every piece of fat needs to be saved. If it smells off, looks spoiled, or has been mishandled, throw it away. Saving money is never a reason to ignore food safety. And there is another mistake I want you to avoid. Do not leave a giant cut sitting on the counter while you figure out how to cut it. Keep the meat cold, work efficiently. Clean your board and tools before and after handling raw beef. Keep raw meat away from foods that will not be cooked. Wash your hands. These are simple habits, but they matter more than any secret knife trick. Now let's get back to the money. Suppose you spend $90 on a large cut. After trimming, maybe you have less usable steak than the original package weight suggests. That is normal. You need to calculate your real cost based on what you actually keep. If you start with 8 pounds and end up with 6.5 pounds of steak, your effective steak cost is higher than the sticker price per pound. But you also may have usable lean trimming and cooking fat, so the calculation does not stop at the steaks. That is the honest way to compare. Do not tell yourself you saved 50% because the package looked cheap. Do the math. Price paid divided by total usable food. That is your number. And if the number is still lower than buying individual steaks, you have found the deal. There is another reason I like this approach. You control the timing. A packaged steak has already been cut. Once that surface is exposed to air, the clock starts moving faster. A large vacuum-sealed piece has less exposed surface area than a stack of individually cut steaks. That can make storage more practical. But remember, packaging does not make meat immortal. Follow the package's use by guidance and keep your refrigerator at a safe temperature. If you open a vacuum package and something smells strongly unpleasant or the meat looks abnormal, do not try to convince yourself that saving a few dollars is worth the risk. When in doubt, throw it out. Now let's talk about cooking. You did all this work for one reason. You want a better steak. And this is where thick cuts give you another advantage. A thicker steak gives you more room to develop a browned exterior without immediately overcooking the center. Before cooking, dry the surface thoroughly. This matters. Moisture on the outside of the steak has to evaporate before the surface can brown efficiently. Pat it dry with paper towels. Season it according to your preference. Salt is the part I would not skip. You can season shortly before cooking or salt ahead of time and give the seasoning time to work into the surface. What I would not do is dump a mountain of complicated ingredients onto good beef and assume that more flavoring means better steak. Sometimes the meat just needs salt, heat, and patience. Get your cooking surface properly hot, then place the steak down and leave it alone long enough to develop a crust. Do not flip it every 10 seconds. Do not press it flat with a spatula. You are not trying to squeeze the juice out of it. You are trying to build color on the surface while controlling the internal temperature. For thicker steaks, an instant read thermometer is one of the best tools you can own. Forget guessing. Insert the thermometer into the thickest part of the steak and monitor the temperature. Your preferred final temperature depends on how you like your steak, so use a reliable temperature guide and remember that the steak can continue cooking slightly after you remove it from the heat, then rest it. Give the juices time to redistribute before slicing. That last few minutes can feel painful when you are hungry. Wait anyway. And when you finally slice it, remember what we talked about earlier. Look at the grain, cut across it. That is how you turn the work you did at the cutting board into a steak that actually eats well. Now here is the part I really want you to remember. The secret is not Costco. It is not one particular cut. And it is not some magic seasoning. The secret is buying beef in a form that gives you control, understanding what portion of that beef is actually usable, and refusing to pay someone else to perform simple work you can do yourself. Sometimes the larger package is cheaper. Sometimes it is not. Sometimes the individual steaks are actually the better purchase because you do not need a large quantity or because the trim loss is too high. That is why you should never blindly buy whole. Look at the numbers, look at the meat, look at the amount of trimming, then decide. That is how a butcher shops. And once you start shopping that way, the meat case becomes a completely different place. You stop asking which package looks cheapest. You start asking, what am I getting for every dollar? That is a much better question. Next time you are at Costco, do something simple. Walk past the first tray of steaks. Look at the larger cuts. Check the price per pound. Look at the marbling. Look at the shape. Think about how much trimming you will realistically get. Then compare that final usable amount against the price of the steaks you were originally going to buy. If the numbers work, buy the larger cut. Bring it home cold. Trim it carefully. Cut the steaks to the thickness you actually want. Save the useful trim. Package everything properly. And now you are not just buying steak. You are buying the raw material for several meals and doing the portioning yourself. That is the old butcher's way of thinking. You do not need the most expensive piece of beef in the store. You need to know what is actually worth paying for. And the next time you see a beautiful whole ribeye sitting beside a stack of expensive pre-cut steaks, look closely at both. There is a reason one costs more. But there is also a reason the butcher knows exactly which one he would take home. And once you understand what to look for, you might start making the same choice. There is one more thing I want you to understand before you start doing this regularly. The biggest savings do not always happen when you buy the cheapest beef. They happen when you stop wasting the beef you already paid for. That sounds like a small difference, but over several months it adds up. Think about how often a family buys a package of steaks, trims off a little fat, throws away the uneven end pieces, cooks 2 steaks, and then forgets about the rest of the package until it has been sitting in the refrigerator too long. That is money disappearing in small pieces. When you buy a larger cut, you can decide exactly what happens to those pieces. And that gives you another advantage most shoppers never consider: portion control. If you have a family of 4, you can cut 4 large steaks for Saturday night. Then take the smaller pieces and make steak sandwiches during the week. The lean scraps can become fajitas. Another portion can become beef and vegetables. Nothing has to look like a restaurant steak to be valuable. This is exactly how I was taught to think about meat. Do not ask whether a piece looks pretty. Ask whether it is useful. There is a difference. Now, if you are standing at Costco looking at a whole strip loin, there is another little trick I want you to know. Do not automatically start cutting from one end just because that is where the knife happens to be. Study the shape first. The center section is usually where you can get your most uniform steaks. The thinner end can be handled separately. That means you can make the center pieces your dinner steaks and use the thinner portions for meals where thickness does not matter as much. This is how you avoid forcing every piece into the same shape. A butcher does not fight the shape of the meat. He works with it. And that is something you can do at home. If one end is too thin for a thick steak, do not try to turn it into one. Use it for another meal. Cut it into strips. Cook it quickly. Use it in tacos. Make sandwiches. There is no rule saying every piece has to become a perfect steak. Now let's talk about one mistake that can ruin an otherwise good bargain: over trimming. People see a thick layer of fat and think every white section needs to disappear. That is not how I would handle it. First, distinguish between soft external fat and hard connective tissue. They are not the same thing. Some external fat can be useful during cooking. Hard pieces of connective tissue are another story. Those are the parts you want to remove because they can stay chewy no matter how carefully you cook the steak. You are not trying to make the meat completely fat-free. You are trying to make each portion appropriate for the way you plan to cook it. That distinction saves meat, and it also saves time. There is no prize for producing a perfectly symmetrical piece of beef if you had to throw away half a pound to get there. Now here's something else that surprises people. The cheapest steak is not always the steak with the lowest price per pound. Let me give you an example. Imagine one package costs $12 per pound. Another costs $15. The $12 package looks like the obvious winner. But suppose the cheaper package has heavy trimming and a lot of unusable material, while the $15 package is already well trimmed and gives you almost all usable steak. The gap can shrink quickly. That is why I always tell people to compare usable yield. Price per pound is useful, but it is not the whole story. The same principle works when you buy whole cuts. If you are comfortable trimming them, a larger package can make sense. If you hate trimming and know you will throw everything into the trash, then the pre-cut steaks may actually be worth paying extra for. Convenience has value. There is nothing wrong with paying for it. The mistake is paying for convenience without realizing that you are paying for it. Once you know that, you can make the decision yourself. And here is another thing you can do with a large cut that you cannot do nearly as easily with pre-cut steaks. You can control the size of your portions. That matters more than people think. If you normally eat a very large steak because that is how it comes packaged, you can cut a smaller steak and use the rest for another meal. Or if you have guests coming over, you can cut several larger portions at once. You are controlling the inventory. That is what a butcher is really doing, managing inventory, not just cutting meat. Now let's say you have finished cutting your steaks and you are staring at the leftover pieces. Do not rush them into the garbage. Take a minute, sort them. Lean meat here, fat there, connective tissue and questionable pieces somewhere else. That small sorting step can turn what looks like waste into useful ingredients. Clean, lean pieces can go into a freezer bag. When you have enough, you can grind them or use them in another dish. Clean beef fat can be rendered if you have a use for it. But again, be selective. Do not save scraps simply because you feel guilty throwing them away. Save the pieces that have a purpose. That is the butcher mindset. Use what makes sense, discard what does not. And there is a bigger lesson here. Food prices are not just about the price printed on a package. They are about how much usable food reaches your plate. That is why learning a few basic cutting skills can be more valuable than hunting for another coupon. A coupon saves you money once. A skill can save you money every time you shop. And you do not need to become a professional butcher to get the benefit. You need to learn a few things: how to identify the cut, how to recognize the grain, how to trim without destroying usable meat, how to portion it, how to package it, and how to cook the final steak properly. That's enough. You do not need a commercial meat room in your garage. You need a clean cutting board, a sharp knife, cold beef, and a little patience. One more warning. Do not attempt to cut large pieces of meat with a dull knife because you think it is safer. It is not. A dull knife requires more force. More force means less control. Less control is exactly what you do not want when your other hand is holding the meat. Keep your knife sharp and work slowly. If you are uncomfortable with a particular cut, ask the butcher department whether they can portion it for you. You are not proving anything by making a difficult cut yourself. The goal is good food and good value, not showing off. And if Costco will cut a large piece for you, ask what services they offer before you buy. Policies and services can vary by location, so do not assume every warehouse handles every cut the same way. Sometimes the smartest move is simply asking. That is another old butcher habit. Ask questions. You would be amazed how much useful information is available behind that counter when you actually speak to the person working there. Ask what the cut is. Ask how it is normally portioned. Ask whether they have a larger piece in the back. Ask what they recommend for the cooking method you have in mind. You may not always get the answer you expect, but you will learn something, and that knowledge becomes more valuable every time you shop. Now, if you are doing this for the first time, I would not start with the biggest and most complicated piece of beef you can find. Start small. Buy a manageable cut. Practice trimming. Cut a few steaks. Cook one. See what you would change. Then do it again. The second time will be easier. By the third or fourth time, you will start seeing the meat differently. You will notice the grain before you cut. You will recognize the difference between useful fat and tough connective tissue. You will start looking at the shape and already know where your steaks are going to come from. That is when the real savings begin. Not because the store suddenly lowered its prices, because you became better at buying. And that is the secret I wish more people understood. The butcher method is not a secret ingredient. It is a way of thinking. Buy intelligently. Inspect the cut, understand the yield, cut according to the meat, save the useful trim, package it properly, cook it with control, and stop paying extra for work you can comfortably do yourself. Next time you walk into Costco, do not just look at the steak trays. Look around them. Look for the larger cuts. Compare the price per pound. Think about how much usable meat you can realistically get. Then decide whether doing the work yourself is worth it. For some people, it will be. For others, convenience will win. Both are fine. The important thing is that you know the difference, because once you understand what you are actually paying for, a steak case stops being a collection of packages. It becomes a